I got into the Sonic series with the release of Sonic Mega Collection for the Nintendo GameCube. I didn't grow up with the Sega Genesis in the 90s, so playing the Mega Collection in the mid-2000s was my gateway to this indelible franchise. Regardless of where this series goes, the turns it takes, or the quality of games that have recently been released, the original Genesis titles from the 90s are some of my favorite video games of all time. They have an aesthetic and an attitude that stands above its contemporaries. The only games that even come close to touching the golden era of Sonic is Rareware's Donkey Kong Country trilogy for the Super Nintendo, in my opinion at least. In today's video, I would like to dive into some of the weird oddities and obscure trivia regarding Sonic the Hedgehog, Sonic 2, and Sonic CD for the Sega Genesis and Sega CD. I want to talk about these three games in particular because they are my personal favorite entries in this series. I would cover Sonic 3 and Knuckles as well, but I think I'll save that game for some other time. And I'm sure if you're a die-hard Sonic fan, you're probably more than familiar with some of the topics that I'll cover in this video. But with that being said, let's dive right in. Sonic 1 is a game that I will defend until I am blue in the face and out of breath. I see this game catching a lot of strays nowadays, and I feel like so many players go into this game under the pretense of constant speed and velocity, which to be fair was how the game was marketed back then. But at the end of the day, Sonic is just another platformer, much like Super Mario. Speed is a reward for memorizing the levels and getting good at the game. That's the thing that I truly love about Sonic 1, the use of momentum and velocity to get where you need to go. There's no spin dash in this game, at least not in the original version, so using the physics to gain speed and shoot through shuttle loops is a necessary and satisfying gameplay loop. Above all else, this is what I really love out of the classic Genesis Sonic games, the momentum. I think the level design throughout Sonic 1 is also pretty excellent, one level notwithstanding. Labyrinth Zone is the token water level in Sonic 1, and it's the one zone in this game that I'm not really a fan of. I dig the music and the art direction of Labyrinth Zone quite a bit, but playing through it feels like you're wading through molasses. There's two things of note in Labyrinth Zone that I find interesting. In Act 1, there is this elevator platform here that lets you access a shortcut to skip over half of the level. It's pretty neat, and I wasn't aware of it until a few years ago actually. However, there is something far more interesting and sinister lurking within the depths of Labyrinth Zone. If you hold down on the D-pad at the end of the first two acts of Labyrinth Zone, the game freaks the fuck out and freezes, with some text displaying a message that says illegal instruction. You can actually advance the text by pressing the C button. I'm not entirely sure why this happens, but upon further research I stumbled upon an explanation. This is way beyond my pay grade, so I'm just gonna show you the screen cap from the Sonic Retro page on this glitch. This bizarre anomaly genuinely gives me the creeps. It's something straight out of one of those fan-made anti-piracy screen videos, except it's real and it's in the game. I don't know why, but glitches like this, as well as those old PS2 or GameCube disc read errors, give me the goosebumps. To my understanding, this glitch works in most versions of Sonic 1, whether you're emulating it or playing it on actual hardware, barring the 2011 Christian Whitehead remaster. Labyrinth Zone, just in general, prods at my imagination. The weird images embossed on the blocks in the foreground and the background, the bizarre, inexplicable fourth act that you find in Scrap Brain Zone's third act. I don't know, there's just something off about this level, I can't quite put my finger on it. Time to dispel a rumor regarding Sonic 1. It's widely been circulated that the iconic Sega chant at the beginning of the game takes up 1/8 of the cartridge's 512 kilobytes of memory. Sega! In actuality, the Sega chant only takes up 26 kilobytes of the ROM memory, which adds up to only about 1/16th, not 1/8th, of the total ROM. I still yearn for the lost Tokyo Toy Show beta of Sonic the Hedgehog. Man, this thing keeps me up at night. For those of you who don't know, this was the first ever showcase of Sonic the Hedgehog to the public. And according to Yuji Naka, this build is lost to the sands of time. Apparently, they wanted to include this prototype on the Sonic Mega Collection in some form or capacity. Go figure. Speaking of beta builds, let's talk about the differences between the prototype build of Sonic 1 and the final release. What you're seeing here is gameplay that I captured from the beta ROM, which I procured off of the cutting room floor. This beta being publicly available was actually a relatively recent development in the Sonic community, as the prototype was acquired by a fan named Buckaroo and dumped online in early 2021. Boot up the ROM and immediately you'll notice that there's no Sega chant, just a blank screen with the Sega logo. Eagle-eyed viewers will also notice the press start button graphic on the title screen, which was dummied out in the final game. The percussion also sounds different in this build. The snare in particular sounds much rougher and louder. Green Hill Zone's layout is substantially different throughout the 3 acts, and this will be consistent throughout the rest of the zones in this build. There are these huge checkered boulders you can push around that were removed from the final game. You'll also notice that Sonic does a little fist bump in the air whenever you finish an act if you jump. This was also cut from the final release. In Marble Zone, there are these eerie floating UFOs in the sky. Apparently, they were taken out of the final game because they were incongruent with the aesthetic of the level. In addition to the vertical spike chandeliers that drop from above, there are also horizontal crusher spikes strewn throughout the level. Spring Yard Zone is called Sparkle Zone in this build, and it has a completely different look to it, being more visually symmetrical with the later Casino Night Zone and Carnival Night Zone from Sonic 2 and 3, respectively. Labyrinth Zone is also drastically different in both visuals and the level layout. In this build, it takes place within a cave, and there are these alcoves which could have acted as an area to catch your breath above the water. Speaking of which, there isn't any water in this level, as it probably wasn't implemented yet in this phase of the game's development. Scrap Brain Zone was known as Clockwork Zone, and it's in a very incomplete state. Interestingly, if you punch in the level select code, you'll see that Labyrinth Zone is listed seconds sequentially. I guess they figured that throwing an underwater level at you immediately after the first level would be a bit of a difficulty spike. Overall, this beta build is considerably different from the final release. Sonic 1 in general just has a somewhat strange atmosphere to it. I don't know, this might just be me projecting my own feelings with the game, but I always felt like the vibe of Sonic 1 was far lonelier and more sinister than any of the sequels. Well, aside from Sonic CD. The game isn't as polished as Sonic 2 or 3 or CD, so that might also be a factor, but I don't know, something about this game feels bizarre compared to any of its sequels. I feel the same way about Mega Man 1 for the NES. Spring Yard Zone and Labyrinth Zone stick out to me. I never quite understood what the theme of Spring Yard Zone is supposed to be. Like, we're in some kind of a park, and there's a city in the background with some mountains even further in the background. Are we in Washington State? Is this the Catskill Mountains of New York? Where is this place? The special stages in Sonic 1 are also very surreal and trippy. I love the look of these levels. Regardless, I happen to love Sonic 1 to death in spite of its shortcomings. I've replayed it too many times to count. I could make a whole entire video dedicated to Sonic 2 and its development. This game has some of the most fascinating history behind its creation. Where Sonic 1 was developed in Japan by the original Sonic team, comprised of Yuji Naka, Naoto Oshima, and Hirokazu Yasuhara, Sonic 2 was developed in the United States by the newly formed Sega Technical Institute in California. The development of Sonic 2 was tumultuous. There was a cultural and language barrier between the newly formed developers at Sega Technical Institute. Due to this, and the short development time of Sonic 2 as a whole, a myriad of levels and features were cut during development that never made it into the final game. If you go into the sound test of Sonic 2 and listen to track 10, it plays this mystical sounding song in 3/4 time. Some perceptive players have noticed that this song isn't actually featured in any of the zones of the game. That's because this track is from a scrapped Hidden Palace zone, a level that was speculated to be where you obtain the supersonic form after collecting all of the Chaos Emeralds. This cut level would later be re-implemented in the 2011 Christian Whitehead mobile remaster of Sonic 2 and its subsequent ports. You can find it by jumping down this pit in Mystic Cave Zone, which is infamous among players. Hidden Palace Zone would also make an appearance in Sonic 3 and Knuckles, however it doesn't bear any resemblance to its scrapped Sonic 2 incarnation. There is also concept art of an Ocean Wind Zone, a Wood Zone, which was actually at one point implemented in the game, a Desert level, which would become the influence for Mirage Saloon Zone in Sonic Mania, a Tropical Sun Zone, which would become the basis for Angel Island Zone in Sonic 3 and Knuckles, and most infamously, Genocide City Zone. Genocide City Zone is pretty infamous, probably because the name is gangster as hell. Apparently, the name came from a Japanese developer who had a somewhat tenuous grasp on the English language. The level's name was later changed to Cyber City Zone before being scrapped and morphing into the third act of Metropolis Zone. Interestingly enough, Metropolis Zone is the only level in this game with 3 acts. There were initially plans for a total of 18 zones in the game. However, the scope and scale of Sonic 2 had to be cut back due to both memory limitations and the aforementioned rush development. One of the most legendary beta builds of Sonic 2 is the Nick Arcade build. This is one of the earlier builds of Sonic 2, and it gets its name from being debuted on Nick Arcade, a TV block in the 90s that showed off video games. For some reason, inexplicably, if the player ran into a wall, Sonic would smack into it and fall on his ass. Another neat oddity of the Nick Arcade build is the end-of-level signposts featuring front-facing character sprites instead of the 3/4-facing sprites in the final game. Time travel was at one point considered a part of the gameplay loop during development. The level Hilltop Zone in the final game is a remnant of this, as it was allegedly supposed to be the past incarnation of Emerald Hill Zone, the first level. While time travel was cut from Sonic 2, it would become a core part of the gameplay loop in Sonic CD, which was in development by members of the original Sonic team in Japan. Speaking of Sonic CD, Sonic CD is hands down one of my favorite video games ever made. Critics of the game may lambast the level design for being too convoluted or busy, or how the time travel mechanic isn't implemented super intuitively, but none of that bothers me. This game just kicks ass, full stop. The feeling of letting a super peel out rip as you zoom off at Mach speeds, the beautiful saturated colors and the art direction of Sonic CD. And it was inspired by Mika Ninagawa, a Japanese photographer who is known for her incredibly colorful saturated landscapes. And I love the incredible soundtracks that score this game. Yeah, soundtracks. There are two individual scores for Sonic CD, the original Japanese and PAL soundtrack and the American soundtrack. And you know what? I love both of these soundtracks. I'm super nostalgic for the American soundtrack, as it's how I first heard this game's music on the Sonic Gems collection, which was based off of one of the PC ports of Sonic CD. I'm partial to the Act Clear music in the North American version. And I actually prefer the American special stage music to the Japanese one. I think the American score is an incredible feat, considering the short amount of time that David Young and Spencer Nielsen had to arrange and produce these tracks. But oh man, the Japanese score just clears. Stardust Speedway, Quartz Quadrant, Collision Chaos. The Japanese soundtrack for Sonic CD is nothing short of a work of art, and it's right up there with Ridge Racer Type 4 and Chrono Trigger for my favorite video game scores. And Naofumi Hataya and Masafumi Ogata knocked it out of the damn park. Speaking of the awesome music, I highly recommend that you check out the Sonic the Remix album. It's an official arrangement album by the original composers of Sonic CD, and it's incredible. Tracks run the gamut of drum and bass, house, new jack swing, electronic bossa nova, and hip-hop. It's a great listen, and I really can't recommend it enough. Sonic CD used to have this somewhat legendary reputation as this elusive game that not too many Sonic fans got to play due to it being released on the Sega CD. I think the reason that so many people are divisive on Sonic CD nowadays is due to this legendary reputation not being met when the game eventually got ported to more platforms and became more readily available for people to play. But it wasn't just stuck on the Sega CD back then. I still have my PC copy, and check out this creepy looking ACM render of Sonic right here. Have you ever noticed how the past arrangements of the level music are the same in both the American and Japanese versions of Sonic CD? This is because the past tracks were hard-coded as PCM files. The past is the Genesis, the Sega CD, optical media. Now that is the future. For you American Sonic CD players who grew up with the Western soundtrack, have you ever noticed that during the special stages, the beat drops right as Sonic takes off? It's such a cool detail, and I'm type compelled to believe it was a deliberate detail. And man, speaking of the special stages, they are gorgeous. These are my favorite special stages in the entirety of the franchise, and the backgrounds just stoke the fires of my imagination. Like, where are these locations? This one is just straight up Neo Tokyo from Akira. This is 16-bit sprite work at its absolute best, let me tell you. Oh, and one last thing regarding the music. The Japanese theme to Sonic CD, You Can Do Anything, often colloquially known as Toot Toot Sonic Warrior, is actually a remixed arrangement of the Green Hill Zone theme from 8-bit Sonic 2.
In your mind to seek the planet to conquer time. Toot your Sonic Warrior, be the space of time. Toot your Sonic Warrior, braver in your mind.
For those of you who have only played the Christian Whitehead remaster of Sonic CD, you may not know this, but the spin dash in this game operates completely differently compared to the Sonic 2 spin dash. It was often rumored for the longest time that the Sonic CD spin dash was added to the game at the last moment of development, and people say that this is why it feels so unpolished and jank to use. However, what with the leaked 1992 build of Sonic CD having the spin dash present, this can't really be the case. Sonic CD was released in September of 1993, nearly a full year later. According to these magazine scans from Electronic Gaming Monthly, Sonic CD was initially going to be an enhanced port of Sonic 2, which was released in 1992, the year prior. Eventually, they changed course and made Sonic CD an entirely original title. Another thing I love about Sonic CD was the conception of both Metal Sonic and Amy Rose. I really like her original design here. In the North American manual of Sonic CD, Amy's name was changed to Princess Sally, likely as a way to tie it in with the Sonic SatAM animated series. Did you know that if you stand completely still for 3 minutes, Sonic throws up the deuce and causes an instant game over? Yeah, I'm sure you all probably knew that one. And this was one of the earliest instances of Sonic speaking, as he exclaims,
"I'm out of here!"
But did you know that there are 2 entirely unused voice clips from his voice actor, Masato Nishimura? One of the voice clips has him shouting,
"All right!"
which some people speculate he would say at the end of a level. The other voice clip has him say,
"Yeah!"
which was replaced with the
"Yes!"
voice clip in the final game when you get an additional life. I mentioned a moment ago that this game has been ported to a number of platforms, and in the mid-90s it was ported to home PCs by Sega and Expert Software. If you comb through the files of this PC release, you'll find these super cool looking high-res sprites of Dr. Robotnik, Sonic, and the gang. I would love to see a Sonic game with this kind of sprite work. I think the closest thing we've gotten to that is Knuckles Chaotix, which is a game I'll save talking about for another time. Finally, to wrap up this video, I would like to talk about the Sonic CD sound test. If you've clicked on this video, you're more than likely already aware of these hidden sound test illustrations, but I've got to talk about these. On the title screen, enter to access the sound test. Once you're in the sound test menu, there are 3 options that you can mess around with. The first one is FM, which refers to the Yamaha FM synth chip that the Genesis music was programmed in. Next up is PCM, which stands for Pulse Code Modulation. This is how the Genesis converts analog audio input into readable digital data. The last one is DA, which I'm pretty sure stands for Direct Audio, but don't quote me on that. Infamously, if you punch in certain number combinations into the sound test, you'll get these really cool illustrations by the game's designers. Type in FM42, PCM03, and DA01 to get this incredible illustration of MC Sonic spitting some bars on the mic. B-Boy Metal Sonic stanced up in the background, and Dr. Robotnik on the 1s and 2s, cooking up some beats on his turntables. I love this illustration so much. MC Sonic could definitely spit some crazy Midwest chopper flows. This image was drawn by Kazuyuki Hoshino, the character designer behind Amy and Metal Sonic. And I gotta love the reference to A Tribe Called Quest's Can I Kick It off of their debut album People's Instinctive Travels and the Paths of Rhythm. Rest in peace, Fife Dog. If only we got a Sonic Tribe collab. maybe in another universe. Next up, punch in FM46, PCM12, and DA25 to get what is undoubtedly the most popular thing to spawn from this game. This is a decidedly eerie screen of what appears to be Sonic wearing a Guy Fawkes mask plastered all over the screen. It doesn't help that the music that plays here is the North American boss battle theme from the game. Fun fact, this illustration was drawn by Masato Nishimura, the voice actor for Sonic in this game. This image of Sonic has become rather popular in recent years due to its eeriness, but honestly, I think the next image is creepier. Punch in FM42, PCM04, and DA21 to get this chilling image of a muscular Sonic obscured by the shadows. I know this is supposed to be a Batman parody, but honestly, this image of Sonic just looks like a Hokuto no Ken character. I really don't know why, but this drawing freaks me out. Imagine seeing this muscular Sonic entity in a dark alleyway at night. This one was drawn by Takumi Miyake, a graphic designer who worked on Sonic CD, Knuckles Chaotix, and Nights into Dreams. Next up, punch in FM40, PCM12, and DA11 to get this really cool drawing of Tails to a Lotus Super 7 automobile. The caption says, "See you next game," which is kind of funny considering this game came out a year after Sonic 2, but I suppose Sonic CD fits in between those games in the timeline. This one was drawn by Yasushi Yamaguchi, the creator of Tails. And finally, enter FM44, PCM11, and DA09 to be greeted by this adorable chibi drawing of Sonic. Very, very cute. This one was drawn by Masahiro Sanpei, a former character designer at Sega who worked on Sonic CD and a stall for the Sega Saturn. You should play Sonic CD. It's a really good game. I played the original Sega CD title for the sake of this video, and it was nice to hear the North American soundtrack for the first time in a very long time. But I can't recommend the 2011 Christian Whitehead remaster enough. If you're gonna play the game, you should play that version of the game. It's a damn shame that you can't purchase the Christian Whitehead remaster anymore, so acquire it however you can, if you know what I'm saying. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'm sure there was probably a lot of stuff that folks are familiar with that I covered here, but I just wanted to talk about some of my favorite games from the Sonic series, and in the near future I'll talk about Sonic 3 and Knuckles, or perhaps the Dreamcast adventure titles. Thanks for watching my video, and I hope you have an excellent rest of your day.